Believe it or not, about 1% of the world's population controls about 82% of the wealth in the world. So how did they do it? How did they create it? If you've ever wondered why the rich keep getting richer and how you can join the ranks of the wealthy and successful, these special episodes of the Michael Yardney podcast, the ones I'm calling Rich Habits, Poor Habits, that I'm doing together with Tom Corley, are exactly for you. So today, I'm going to show you how you can become one of the 1%. And this little surprise twist, you're probably already there.
Are you interested in property investing, success or money? Well, you're in the right place. This is the Michael Yardney podcast, where each week you'll learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in 20 minutes or less. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the 4th time he's won a similar award in the last 6 years.
Have you ever wondered why the rich keep getting richer and how you can join the ranks of the wealthy and successful? Well, there's been lots of research into this question, and from now on the first Thursday of each month, in between the regular episodes of my podcast, I'm going to chat with you about this on what I'm calling my Rich Habits, Poor Habits podcast, where Tom Corley and I are going to talk about the rich habits you must have to succeed, as well as the poor habits you better avoid. Now, these monthly podcasts will be especially useful for you if you're aspiring for more, if you want to become more financially comfortable, if you want to create lifetime wealth, or if you want to teach your children how to become rich and you want to leave a legacy. Now, this show came about because I recently read an article complaining about the rich. The author was upset by the fact that about 1% of the world's population control 82% of the wealth in the world. Now, in the author's mind, there was something inherently wrong, something unfair about this. The author, like many who are not in the 1%, felt the wealth that the 1% created didn't necessarily belong to them. And in his article, he offered the government solutions how to cap their wealth, how to redistribute the wealth to the rest of the world. Other articles recently have shown that the rich really are getting richer, and they're doing so a lot faster. Personal wealth around the globe reached $201 trillion US dollars last year, and that's a 12% gain from the year before, and it's been the strongest annual growth rate of wealth according to the Boston Consulting Group for about 5 years. Now, of course, this shocking finding was the fodder to some sensational headlines. Before we go on, let me be clear that I'm not belittling anyone's hardship. I know there's going to be people listening to this podcast who are not in a good financial position. And I recognise that being unemployed or not being able to keep up your mortgage payments aren't just financial problems, they're social problems, they cause emotional problems, and they strike at your sense of worth. But before we go on, let's put things into perspective. There are some really interesting numbers that emerge when you expand your view and look at the richest 1% in the entire world. You see, one of the things the papers forget to mention is if you're listening to the podcast or reading their articles, you're probably already in the top 1% in the world, because the world's richest 1% is most of the middle class in the Western world, in Australia, in the United States, where people are listening to this podcast. That's because there are billions of people living in underdeveloped and undeveloped countries in the world. So back to our original concept. It is true, around 1% of the world's population controls about 82% of the wealth in the world. And the top 1% are always going to control most of the wealth until the other 99% figure out how the 1% got to cultivate their wealth. So how do you do that? That's what I'm going to discuss today with my good friend Tom Corley, who's my co-author of our international best-selling book, Rich Habits, Poor Habits. Now, if you don't know Tom, he's a CFA and a CPA. He was recently in Australia at our wealth retreat on the Gold Coast. That's the 3rd year in a row he's come to share his wisdom. And boy, did he get a standing ovation at his fantastic talks. And I do a weekly video with him on my property update blog as well. But Tom He's a CPA in New Jersey, but for 5 years he observed and documented the daily activities of wealthy people and people living in poverty, and his research identified over 200 activities that separate the haves and the have-nots, and that culminated in his first book, a #1 best-selling book, Rich Habits. Welcome, Tom.
Hey, Michael, it's good to see you again.
Tom, I'm not sure what it's like in the United States, but here in Australia, there's a lot of fuss made about the fact that 1% of the population control a significant amount of the wealth. Sometimes it's said that it's 50%, other times 80, 90%. And many people seem to think that's unfair. What's it like over where you are?
Well, it's the same thing. In fact, it's a hot topic. You know, we call it the wealth gap. The income gap. It goes by a lot of different synonyms, you know. But when you bring it up, 50% of the people you bring it up to are going to be pissed off at the wealthy people, and the other 50% are going to be pissed off at the poor people who are upset about the rich people.
Well, Tom, I think it's fair to say that anybody who's watching this through our own channels, through YouTube, through Facebook, or our blogs, is very likely in the 1% anyway. They don't recognize that because there are billions of people around the world in the developing and the underdeveloped countries who make up the bulk of the population. So we're born in the best time in history, and for most of our audience in Western world, in America and in Australia in particular, we're in the best places in the world where everyone would want to live. So I think the first thing is to be grateful for what we already have. But again, rather than try and pull that 1% down, let's bring everyone else up. So let's understand how the 1% have accumulated their wealth, Tom, so that we can get there or get higher up the ladder as well. How have they done?
Yes. So Michael, so here's the whole point is, you know, everybody focuses on all these really, really rich people, the billionaires. They are the outliers in terms of numbers. There are only 680 billionaires in the United States, and there's something like 2,400 billionaires in the whole world. So and just in the United States alone, there's 15 million millionaires. So there's a lot more millionaires than there are billionaires. And the point is, these bell curve, I call them bell curve millionaires because they represent about 99% of the millionaires out there. That's what you want to be pursuing. You don't want to be pursuing the billionaires because they're outliers. So what do you have to do to become a bell curve millionaire? Well, what I found in my research is that 88% of these self-made millionaires, they read every day. They read to learn. They did at least 30 minutes, but oftentimes it was more. I know I do about an hour and a half a day now. So I've just embraced that rich habit, and it's helped grow my knowledge base. And now I'm considered an expert in my, the habits and wealth creation in the United States anyway. So that's helped me a great deal.
So, Tom, they read to learn as opposed to read to entertain themselves.
That's right. They're just not reading for the sake of reading. You know, reading isn't a bad thing to do. But if you're pursuing success, or if you want to improve your life, reading for entertainment's not going to help. What you want to do is read to learn something about your field, your vocation, or the dream that you're pursuing. Like for me, it's writing books and wealth creation, becoming successful habits. So I read everything there is under the sun that has to do with that stuff every day, probably an hour and a half a day.
We know that the 1% have long-term goals. They've set goals, but they also have deliberate practices every day, Tom, to help achieve those goals.
Yeah, and the deliberate practice, I'll give you an example. So I write at least an hour to 2 hours every single day. I've been doing it since 2009. Now I've improved my writing dramatically, but I wouldn't have improved my writing had I not been doing the deliberate practice. I study words. I look at phrases. I pick up quotes. I even have a binder that I keep on all this stuff. My point is, the ones who are at the top of their field are doing the same thing, whether it's surgeons, sports athletes. They're all doing the same thing. They're finding certain repetitive practices that they want to engage in every day, and then they're studying the way that they do those, whatever it is that they do. So yeah, deliberate practice. In my study, 69% of the self-made millionaires engage in at least 2 hours a day.
So school's not out when you leave school or when you leave college. You have to keep continuously educating yourself, but you're doing it for a purpose. And I know in your study you found that the majority of successful people have set goals, and we've spoken in the past about the importance of having goals. What's the difference between a goal and a dream, Tom? Because everyone has a dream, everyone has a desire.
Yeah, so a dream, that's such a good question. I'm glad you brought it up, because this is really an important thing. So a dream is really something, it's like a wish. What you want to do is figure out what goals you need to achieve in order for that dream to become a reality. So you focus on each individual dream, and then you build your goals around those dreams. Now, what I found in my research is this is what really separates the wheat from the chaff. This is what really is the gap between the 99% and the 1%. The 1% pursue dreams, and then they build goals around those dreams. That's the big differentiator in my research.
And they focus on their goals daily.
That's right. So now, if you can imagine, you have a dream. Now you build goals around that dream, but now you break those goals down into daily. I call them daily habit goals. So now you have these daily habit goals that you're pursuing every day, and because you're doing it every day, eventually you're going to realize that overall goal, whether it's a numerical number or it's a number of meetings that you want to have or real estate that you want to own. It's you build daily habits around the big goal, and you pursue it every day. You just relentlessly pursue it.
Now, we've spoken about the way people behave and how they learn, but we really talk about money, Tom, why a group of us become wealthier than others, and that's because they've got certain money habits as well. They've learned how to save. They've learned the concept of delayed gratification. Some people would call it being frugal, but basically what they've learned to do is spend less than they earn, not using credit cards as their own money, recognizing that it's actually the bank's money, and investing the money that they've saved.
Yeah, so this is why saving is so important, Michael, because you can't invest nothing. So you have to, at some point, stop whatever you're doing, get off of the treadmill where you're spending exactly what you're making, and you have to set aside some amount of money. Now, why? Because you can then take that money and invest it in whatever. But it could be your dream that you're going to invest it in. It could be a business that you're going to invest it in. It could be just in other broad-based investments. My point is, you can't save nothing, so you have to start saving. You can't invest nothing, so you have to start saving. And that's what the self-made millionaires in my study did. 94% of them saved at least 20% long before they were millionaires, Michael, way before they were millionaires. They got into the habit of saving 20%, and then they were able to invest those savings when opportunities presented themselves.
Another thing about the wealthy people is the people they hang around. It's often said that you're like the 5 people you spend most of the time with. So they've got special relationships, don't they, Tom?
Oh, they sure do. 68% of the wealthy in my study, they forge relationships with, I guess you'd call them these 1%ers. But you don't have to be a 1%er in terms of wealth. You just have to be a 1%er in terms of mindset. These are 1%ers are success-minded people. They want to be in the 1%. They want to be millionaires. So these self-made millionaires in my study knew they couldn't do it on their own. So they decided deliberately they were going to forge relationships predominantly with other success-minded people. And that meant also that they were going to have less time to spend with their non-1% friends or family or whatever. So they devoted a lot of time to building relationships with other success-minded people.
Another common trait I know you talk about, Tom, is that successful people, the 1%ers, volunteer. Some people say, oh, look, I haven't got time to do that now. When I'm rich, when I'm wealthy, I will do that. That's the wrong way around, isn't it?
No, this is such a mistake, because what I found in my research is this. The reason the self-made millionaires volunteer so predominantly, and there was 72% of them that volunteered 5 hours or more a month. Why did they do it? Well, of course, there's the part where they're charitable, but actually, I think the underlying reason is they knew that the board and the people that made up the committees were other successful people in their community, and they wanted to associate with those people. Why? Because those people open doors. Those people shortcut the success process. So you're building relationships through your volunteering.
Another habit I know you talk about is the 5 a.m. club, where people wake up early. Now, I'm not a member of the 5 a.m. club. That's a bit too early for me, but I get up at 6 and I get so much done before everyone else does or before others come to work. How have you found that, Tom?
Well, this was a big one for me because, like you, I wasn't an early riser. But when I finished my research sometime in 2008, 2009, that 44% of the wealthy people got up 3 hours or more before they actually started their workday. So I decided, well, I'm going to just take a page out of the wealthy. I'm not rich. Back in 2008, 2009, I wasn't. And I said, I'm going to just get up at 5 in the morning. And it was hard, Michael. It took me 3 months to get into that routine. But do you know what has happened now? Since that time, I've written 4 books, one with you. I got a manuscript that I'm going to publish soon. I've done probably, 100 speaking engagements, a lot of them in the morning. I've read, I'm going to say, 4 books a month as a result. And I've doubled my income since I started this 5 a.m. club of mine. And so, I've accomplished quite a bit. And it's predominantly as a result of the 2 hours of work, hard work that I do in the morning.
I agree with you. Waking up early is important. It allows you to get things done first thing in the morning, first thing in the day, and it helps you move forward in your day and in your life in general. Now, a couple more traits of these 1%ers. Tom, you say that they've become decision makers at work.
Yeah, this is so important because, look, at the end of the day, you want to be in control of your life. Even if your life is seemingly out of control because you're pursuing these dreams, you have multiple streams of income. The point is, when you're a decision maker, you dictate your calendar. You can say, I'm going to take that meeting. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go there. I'm going to Vietnam to do a speaking engagement there. I made a decision. That was a power decision. I call them power decisions. Well, when you're a decision maker, you have the ability to make power decisions. That means you're not backed up against the wall and have to make a decision. You're in a position of authority, and you could say yes or you could say no. That's the big advantage of being a decision maker.
Tom, I've found that a lot of people go to work and they work through the week just waiting for the weekend, and then they work those 30, 40 years just waiting to retire. That must be a very miserable way of going through your life. I think it's important to do work that, well, everyone wants to do work that they love, but at least you've got to do work that you at least like.
Yeah, so what I found is there's really two things that made the millionaires millionaires. One is 86% at least liked what they did for a living, and they made a decent amount. They made it to my 3.2 million minimum threshold. But the ones that had by far the most wealth were the ones that loved what they did for a living. There was about 7% of them that really loved what they did for a living. So if you at least like what you do for a living, you're going to devote more time to it. You're going to do the studying that you need to do. You're going to do the practice that you need to do. You're going to build the relationships that you need to build. And if you love what you do for a living, you're going to find yourself wanting to do it 24 hours a day. And the only reason you stop is because you got to fall asleep because you're exhausted.
Tom, this argument about the 1% or and the 99% or the inequality, that's not going to go away. The rich are getting richer. Interestingly, in this world, the poor are getting richer as well, but the wealth gap will always be there. everyone wants to be at the top of the mountain, but I think what's coming out from our conversation is that very few are willing to make the climb. So that 1% that control the significant amount of wealth are there because they were willing to climb the mountain. So I guess your message is, if you want to become one of the 1%, start climbing. Do what you need to do to accumulate your wealth.
Yeah, that's right. You have to do what we've been talking about, because guess what? It's not going to change. The 1% for eternity are going to control most of the wealth. You might as well reconcile with that and decide that you want to be one of those 1%.
And where most of the people who are viewing this video or listening to this podcast as they're going on with their normal life are situated, they're in the countries where there's the opportunity to do that. We're so lucky that we are at a time where there's enough information, enough education, enough videos, enough podcasts out there to climb that mountain. So thanks a lot for your time, Tom. Look forward to having a chat with you again next week.
Me too, Michael. I look forward to it.
Well, that's it for the first Rich Habits, Poor Habits podcast. And remember, on the first Thursday of every month, in between the regular episodes of my podcast, I'm going to chat with you about the rich habits and the poor habits that make people successful with my good friend Tom Cooley. But if you want to find out more, go to richhabitspoorhabits.com and buy our book. You can buy a Kindle version, you can buy a hard copy version, and each week on Property Update, you're going to get a video from Tom and me. You can go to propertyupdate.com.au and look at the Rich Habits, Poor Habits tab, and you'll be able to get lots more information about this as well. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to this podcast. And it'd be lovely if you could leave some comments, and even better, we'd really appreciate it if you could share this message with somebody else. Pass it on through Twitter, Facebook, send a link to this, because we want to get the message out and get as many people as possible into that 1% to be able to enjoy the wealth that our world offers. Look forward to chatting with you again in my regular Michael Yardney podcast next Tuesday.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property advice. If you got value from listening to this podcast, please leave us a review and we'll read it out on a future show. Just go to michaelyardneypodcast.com/review and it will take you over to iTunes, where you can enter a review and let us know what you think. We'd really appreciate it. If you don't already subscribe on iTunes or on your Android phone, you'll find us there as Michael Yardney Podcast. If you'd like to gain instant access to the show notes or a transcript of the show, head across to michaelyardneypodcast.com. Watch out for our show next week. You learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 20 minutes.